There have been efforts across the nation by parishes to draw more people into church. Some are more successful than others. Dan Cellucci, the CEO of the Catholic Leadership Institute, has been on the front lines of helping parishes bring more people to Mass. He joins us now from Philadelphia. Dan, it's great to have you here with us. During the pandemic, you noticed a pattern of avoidance rather than engagement by church leadership. What did that look like?
Yeah, it was a lot of assumed constraints, as we would say, and it's great to be with you, Montse. The reality was that the folks in parish offices, a lot of our pastors, like all of us, were really struggling with what to do and what we knew and what we didn't know. But there were some things that we were recommending and seeing, like placing phone calls to parishioners and just reaching out in whatever different way to just maintain that relationship. And some just said, well, there's too much going on. People don't want to hear from us. They're getting so many phone calls as it is. But really, I think at the heart of it was maybe a fear or a lack of confidence to actually reach out and have those conversations that we're not used to having sometimes as Catholics.
And you know that those are important. You're an expert in church-going Catholics. This is what you study. It's your ministry. And you mentioned that we practice a faith of habit in this OSV talk that you gave a couple of 18 months ago, I think. And then COVID broke this habit. We know that the numbers are bad. Were they bad before the pandemic?
Yeah, we were on a precipitous decline prior to the pandemic, and the pandemic really only catalyzed and kind of opened that up for us to see more clearly. In our research prior to the pandemic, and actually still to this day, among those who were going weekly to Mass, about 25 to 35% were saying that they were really practicing a faith of habit. They didn't really know why they were going, and that's really the population that we've seen absent since the pandemic because that habit has been broken. So we're seeing an average of between 18 to 30% in some dioceses of people who were going in 2019, not going now, still here in 2022. So we attribute that to that kind of Mass going out of habit that was defined for about a quarter of our folks.
So the pandemic really unearthed something that was already there. That pre-pandemic, this problem of generational disengagement, millennials and Gen Z individuals refusing to come to Mass, have those trends changed in any way?
Unfortunately, they have gone south a little bit quicker. So we see the biggest departure of people not going is millennials and Gen Zs. And so now some of that might be related to, again, their families or the larger families not going. But the reality is a lot of our other regular parts of life or habitual parts of life have resumed. Travel soccer is well and good in the United States of America. And so we don't see any decline there. So it's really not related to COVID precautions or COVID fear as much as it's related to the relevance of the faith in their lives. And that's where we're seeing the biggest decline among millennials and Gen Z.
Well, let's talk about what we can do to move the decline over. What does the Catholic community then need to do to identify what can and should be done to reinvigorate the Christian life in their community?
Sure. I think one of the things we saw as a real clear picture because of COVID were parishes that were really event driven on one end. So everything's an event, the Mass, the fish fry, the fall festival, all these things that are kind of cultural or traditional or habitual. Those things obviously weren't allowed for a period of time. And so those parishes that were kind of on that event driven mentality were really paralyzed and kind of remained so for a long time. Versus parishes that were really formed and steeped in relationship with our Lord, first and foremost, but relationship with each other in the Lord. And so those parishes that were really already kind of in that relationship mindset, meaning we're a community together, we have to be involved in each other's lives, we have to support each other in times of heartache and in times of blessing. Those parishes that really double down on a relationship focus not only have been holding their own, but actually have been thriving despite the larger trend lines going in the opposite direction. So I think it really speaks to a need to be, as Pope Francis says, in the homes of our brothers and sisters, that's where the church really lives. We should not be just a Sunday reality. We really need to be the whole week long, really knowing each other's lives, walking with each other, and the parish doing that in a lot of different ways. One quick story, my CFO at the time had lost her mother to COVID. When I was checking in with her about it, she said, I said, how has the parish been? And she said, well, they were great for the funeral. She said, but you know what made the difference? She said 2 months later, they called me to ask me how I was. And I think those little moments are where we see the big differences. So we can't discount that life happens in small moments, but those small moments really leave a big part in our heart that keeps us connected and keeps us connected to the Lord.
And that's what we're called, to engage with each other. So then where is that silver lining? What good comes from these dismal numbers? And what fruit are you seeing in efforts like the Back to Mass campaign in LA?
Yeah, well, I mean, you had Sarah on. She's a great light in our church. And I think that is certainly a bright light. But I think what as I mentioned earlier, habits were broken. Some good habits of going to Mass, for example, were broken, but other bad habits were broken too. I think the idea, for example, we can't use technology for anything, that was an assumed constraint. And now I see parishes doing small group faith sharing using Zoom or using some type of virtual platform, not because they're afraid of the pandemic, but because for a millennial father or a millennial mother, it's a lot easier to connect with a small group and break open the gospel using Zoom from the comfort of their house. That's a great use of technology that many parishes wouldn't have even dreamed about prior to COVID. I think it also showed, the technology just showed that we as a church are still relatively nimble. I think sometimes we think we can't turn the Titanic, so to speak. But the reality is, in a short period of time, we figured out a lot of different things. And I think that should be really encouraging to us, that we can continue to figure out good strategies for inviting people home.
Well, thank you so much, Dan, both for your mission and for this encouragement.
Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.